I was the kind of kid who always blended into the background. Even now, at 28, I still sometimes struggle to take up space. I'm Ben, and I've always been the nice one in the family. The one who keeps the peace, avoids conflict, agrees to things just to make everyone else comfortable. But being nice, it turns out, doesn't mean you're respected. Not in my family, anyway. Thanksgiving dinner this year was the moment something in me finally snapped, but I didn't show it right away. I just sat there, silent, as always, while my family laughed and poked fun like they always did. But inside, something was boiling over. Let me back up a bit. I come from a big, loud, extremely opinionated family. I'm the youngest of three. My sister Cara is 35, and my brother Mark is 32. Our parents, Diane and Rick, are the kind of people who believe in tough love, which, in practice, meant that growing up, any emotion that wasn't cheerful obedience was dismissed as weakness. If you got mad, you were dramatic. If you got sad, you were ungrateful. And if you stood up for yourself, you were causing problems. Naturally, I learned early on to just smile and nod. Every family has their roles, right? Cara is the high achiever, always bragging about her consulting job, 3 kids, Pinterest-perfect house. Mark is the charmer, though honestly he's just loud and manipulative. He's always got some new hustle going on, always crashing on someone's couch between business ideas. But somehow he's still fun Uncle Mark, who just needs a break. And me? I was the helper. The one who dropped everything to dog sit when Mark had a last-minute emergency trip. The one who always brought dessert to family dinners, even if no one remembered to ask. The one who lent money when people needed it. Quiet, dependable Ben. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house this year. I showed up with a pumpkin pie I made from scratch. I'd been working a lot, 2 jobs actually, but I wanted to contribute. I walked in, and nobody said thanks. My mom gave me a side hug and immediately asked, "Oh, did you bring whipped cream too?" Not hi. Not how are you. Just concern over topping. I shrugged it off, like usual. My threshold for disappointment with them is sky high by now. We all sat down, and things started off normal enough. Cara boasting about her oldest making the gifted program. Mark showing everyone a flashy mock-up of some crypto-adjacent app he's working on. I tried to chime in once, mentioned that I finally paid off my student loans this month. No reaction, just a pivot into how kids today are coddled. But it wasn't until after dinner that things went off the rails. We were sitting in the living room, full and a little buzzed. The conversation turned toward personality types. My mom had seen some video about Enneagrams or whatever, and everyone started assigning each other roles. It started playful. Cara was the boss, obviously. Mark was the visionary. My dad was the provider, my mom the glue. And then my sister looked right at me and said, "And Ben's the doormat." I laughed, because I thought she was joking. I actually thought it was a joke. But she just smiled and added, "No, really. You are. You let people walk all over you. You never speak up, even when you should. It's like you don't even exist sometimes." My mom didn't correct her. My dad didn't object. Mark chuckled and said something like, "You're lucky though, Ben. Less stress when you don't take anything personally." I sat there, frozen, trying to keep my face neutral. They kept talking, kept laughing, like it was all in good fun. But I could feel something in me cracking open. I'd let a lot slide over the years. Comments, jabs, being excluded from decisions, used for favors. But something about that word stuck to my ribs like bad gravy. Doormat. And the worst part was, I couldn't even defend myself. I just smiled politely, like I always do, and muttered something like, "Guess I need a wash." They laughed. I went home early. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started going over all the moments in my life where I let people push past my boundaries. Family, friends, even coworkers. How many times I said yes when I wanted to say no. How many times I felt smaller than everyone around me and let it happen because it's easier. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment and made a list. A literal list of every time my family had asked me for something in the last 5 years. It was long. Airport rides, co-signing leases, babysitting, covering hotel costs, helping Mark with his website, helping Cara move, giving my dad advice on his taxes. I'm an accountant, by the way, not that they ever remember what I actually do. I was angry, but more than that, I was tired. Tired of carrying a family that didn't even seem to notice I existed unless they needed something. And then, Exactly 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my dad called. Hey, Ben, he started, like nothing had happened. Quick thing, do you have a minute? He had that tone in his voice, the one he uses when he's about to ask for something but wants to pretend he's just catching up. I played along, curious. Turns out his business was struggling. Not a huge shock. He owns a small logistics company that's been shaky for years, and apparently they'd lost a major contract. He needed to apply for a bridge loan to keep operations running and had already been denied twice. His credit? Not great. My mom had already co-signed something earlier this year and couldn't help again. Then came the ask. I need someone with solid credit to co-sign this next one, just to show good faith. The bank says it'll really help the approval process. You've always been smart with money. I didn't respond right away. He took that as hesitation. Look, it's just paperwork. You don't actually have to do anything. I'll handle the payments. You won't even notice it's there. I had a flashback to Thanksgiving. My sister's smirk. You're the doormat. And for the first time in my life, I didn't default to saying sure. I didn't offer to meet up to talk more, or ask how I could help. I just said, in the calmest voice I could manage, sorry, Dad. Doormats don't sign legal documents. He went silent, completely silent for a few seconds. Then came the stammering. Ben, come on. Don't be like that. You know I didn't mean anything by that. That was just your sister messing around. You know she talks out of turn. We were just joking. Yeah, I said, funny joke. He started to get defensive, saying things like, this is family, Ben. We help each other. That's what we do. But it didn't sound convincing. It sounded like desperation wrapped in entitlement. I told him I had to go and hung up. That was the first time I'd ever told any of them no. The first time I didn't cushion it with an apology or try to soften the blow. I just said no. And it felt terrifying and incredible. A few days later, Mark texted me something vague like, heard about the loan. Kinda cold, man. Kara chimed in too. Dad said you bailed on him. Thought you cared more than that. The irony? They still didn't understand what they'd done. What years of being overlooked and undervalued does to someone. They just saw my refusal as a betrayal. That was when I knew the dynamic had shifted. For the first time in my life, they were the ones shocked by my behavior. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that I'd already started preparing for this moment long before Thanksgiving. I'd been working quietly in the background, getting my own affairs in order, making moves they hadn't noticed. And what came next? Well, let's just say the fallout from my no was bigger than even I expected. I didn't hear from my dad for a few days after I turned him down. No calls, no texts, just silence. It was oddly peaceful, like I'd stepped outside a storm that I hadn't even realized I'd been standing in. For the first time, my phone wasn't lighting up with requests. No passive-aggressive texts from Kara asking if I was free this weekend to help move some stuff. No late-night calls from Mark begging for a quick loan or a ride because his car randomly died again. Just silence. And honestly, it felt good. But peace doesn't last long in my family. The silence finally broke 1 week later when I got a call from my mom. She never calls me first. Usually she has me call her to check in, or she group texts me along with my siblings. But this time, it was a direct call. I answered, curious. Her tone was sweet at first. Too sweet. Hi, honey. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Haven't heard from you in a bit. I wasn't about to let my guard down. I've been good, Mom. Just working. Small talk followed, but I could feel it coming. She was circling, warming me up. Finally, she dropped it. Your father's been really stressed. He's barely sleeping. He's working so hard to keep the company afloat, and now with the loan being declined again. I didn't say anything. Just let her trail off. She continued. You know how much he's done for this family. It's hard seeing him like this. He's not getting any younger, Ben. I sighed. Mom, I'm not co-signing. I already told him that. Her voice turned sharper. You're being selfish. That word hit me like a slap. Me? Selfish? You don't understand what this loan means. If the business folds, we lose everything. Your father's reputation, our retirement, your sister's kids' tuition. We've all put something into this business over the years. That was when it hit me. They'd all invested in the business. All of them, except me. I had never been asked. Never even told what was going on. Yet now, I was expected to clean up the mess. So why didn't anyone ask me to be part of it when things were good? I asked, why is it only now that you need a signature that I suddenly matter? She paused. A long silence. Then, you're overreacting. And that was the end of that conversation. The next day, I got a call from Kara. I should have let it go to voicemail. I really should have. But I picked up. "Hey, Ben," she said breezily. "So I heard about the loan situation." Of course she had. "I'm not getting involved," I said flatly. "Oh, I'm not calling about that," she lied. "Well, not exactly. I just think you should know. Dad's talking about selling the lake cabin." That caught my attention. The lake cabin wasn't anything fancy. It was a small, aging place upstate that my grandfather had built in the 60s. We used to go there every summer growing up. It had no Wi-Fi, barely functioning plumbing, and walls covered in old fishing rods and Polaroids. But it was ours. And when Grandpa passed, he left it to all three of us grandkids, me, Kara, and Mark, equally. But, like everything else in our family, I'd always been the odd man out. Mark had basically taken it over for years, throwing parties and claiming he did maintenance, though it was clear he just used it as his weekend hangout. Kara had decorated one of the rooms as a kid's zone and treated it like her own vacation home. I rarely got a say. "Why would Dad be selling the cabin?" I asked. "He doesn't even own it." She hesitated. "Well, technically, the title's still in his name. Grandpa left it to us in the will, but Dad never fully transferred the deed. You know how slow he is with paperwork." My stomach dropped. "So legally it's still his?" "Sort of. He always said it was ours, but yeah, on paper, it's still under his name. And with the loan situation, well, the bank might require collateral." I couldn't believe it. After all these years of being sidelined and ignored, now they were planning to put up property that was supposed to be mine too as collateral for a loan I'd already refused to support. I told her flat out, "He can't use the cabin. It's not just his. That's not fair." And then came the kicker. Kara laughed. "Oh, Ben, don't be so dramatic. You've barely even gone up there in the last few years. You don't even use the place." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just hung up. That night, I pulled out every file I had. The cabin, the will, emails from Grandpa, old letters. Sure enough, my name was listed. The cabin was meant to be jointly owned. But legally, it was vulnerable. My dad could still try to leverage it unless someone challenged him. I booked a consultation with a real estate attorney the next morning. And that, it turns out, was the first real domino. Because what I learned from that meeting started unraveling a whole web I didn't even know existed. For starters, the cabin wasn't the only thing still under my dad's name. Several other assets, ones that Grandpa had left for the grandkids, had never been properly transferred. My siblings didn't care because they were allowed to use those assets freely. Mark had been driving Grandpa's old Jeep for years. Kara's kids used the inheritance money meant for education purposes on summer camps and elite private schools. No one had questioned it because it all worked smoothly until now. And I'd been excluded. Not out of malice, maybe, but out of assumption. Assumption that I wouldn't rock the boat, that I'd just go along with whatever they decided. That was when I realized they didn't see me as family. They saw me as furniture. I started keeping a journal, not for emotional reasons, but to document everything. Dates, phone calls, quotes. Something inside me had shifted. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. A week later, my mom hosted a Sunday dinner and invited me, which really meant she told me I was expected to come. I almost didn't go, but then I thought, maybe it was time I saw them all face to face. When I got there, everyone was already seated. The atmosphere was weirdly cheerful. Mark was cracking jokes. Kara was showing off photos from some winter recital. My dad stood when he saw me and gave me a big, awkward pat on the back. "Glad you could make it, son." I didn't smile. I just nodded and sat down. We made it halfway through dinner before the topic came up. It started with Mark saying, "So I hear the bank's final decision comes in tomorrow." He said it casually, like he was talking about sports scores. Then my mom chimed in. "We're optimistic, but it'd be a lot easier if the family showed a united front." They were all looking at me. I cleared my throat. Is this the part where I'm guilted into saving the family? No one laughed. My dad leaned forward. "Ben, look, I know things have been tense. I know you feel underappreciated, and I take responsibility for that. But we're in crisis now. This isn't the time for grudges." I blinked. "You mean this isn't the time for me to have boundaries?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. And then, out of nowhere, Kara snapped. "You're seriously going to let pride ruin everything? Dad built that business for us. You've always been the least involved in the family, and now, when we need you the most, you're suddenly high and mighty? Who even are you lately?" I stared at her. Mark added, "Dude, you've always been soft. That's fine. It's who you are. But don't pretend like you're some big shot now. You owe Dad. We all do." I stood up slowly. "You want to know who I am?" I asked. Everyone fell silent. "I'm the guy who fixed your credit, Mark, when you tanked at trying to launch a vape business in 2019. I'm the guy who washed your kids for free every weekend last summer, Kara, because your husband was too busy. I'm the guy who filed mom's taxes 4 years in a row without a thank you, and the guy who's been ignored, dismissed, and laughed at every time I tried to be more than just the family's background character." No one said a word. I looked directly at my dad. "And I'm the guy who's done being used." I grabbed my coat. My dad called out, "Ben, don't do this." I turned back. "You already did." And I walked out. But I wasn't finished yet. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anger, but because for the first time in years, I felt awake. Raw. Exposed. My heart was pounding with everything I hadn't said over the years. Everything I'd swallowed just to keep the peace. That dinner. The way they cornered me. The words they threw around like my boundaries were just inconvenient. It finally confirmed what I'd always feared but never wanted to admit. They didn't love me. They loved the usefulness of me. And now that I'd removed that usefulness, I was nothing more than a problem. Still, as satisfying as that moment at dinner had been, walking out didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the ache. The part of me that still wanted to be seen, included, respected, that part was still very much alive. And now it was bruised and angry. I spent the next week in a daze. I'd show up to work, run the numbers, do my job, and come home to sit on the couch and stare at nothing. My apartment was quiet, borderline depressing. I hadn't decorated it in years, just the bare essentials. The same IKEA couch I'd bought out of college. Dishes in the sink. No photos on the walls. I'd spent so long putting everyone else first. I didn't even know what my life looked like without them in it. And then came the email that finally broke me. It was from the bank. Somehow, despite everything, my dad had submitted a new loan application and had listed the lake cabin as collateral. Even though I'd said no. Even though I'd warned Kara. Even though I had spoken up. I called the bank directly. At first, they refused to disclose anything, standard procedure. But once I provided the documentation from my grandfather's will, along with proof that the cabin was meant to be divided between 3 parties, the tone shifted. The loan was still under review, but now it was flagged as disputed property. Still, I was shaking. The idea that my father, after everything, would just go ahead and use the cabin anyway, that was the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was betrayal. Legal, deliberate betrayal. I broke down. Completely. I'm not proud of it, but that night, I curled up in bed and cried until I couldn't breathe. Years of being walked on, laughed at, dismissed, used, it all came crashing down. And the worst part? I couldn't even bring myself to tell anyone. I had no close circle, no best friend I could vent to. My whole life had revolved around being the dependable one, the background support, the emotional sponge. And now, I was empty. But hitting rock bottom has a strange way of clearing the fog. The next morning, I got up early, shaved, cleaned the entire apartment top to bottom. I threw away the takeout boxes, dusted off the bookshelf, changed my sheets, opened the windows. I stood in the center of my living room and looked around. For the first time in years, it felt like my space. Then I sat down and made a plan. I had spent nearly a decade in accounting, but always working for others. Small firms, mostly. Helping people with taxes, reconciling books, cleaning up messes. I'd gotten so good at solving other people's problems that I'd never considered solving my own. But now, things were different. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Every skill I had, every certification, every connection. Then I wrote a question at the top of a fresh page. What would I do if I didn't have to be anyone's crutch? The answer came quickly. I'd start my own practice. Quietly. On my terms. I'd always dreamed of it. Starting my own solo firm that specialized in helping freelancers and small businesses manage their finances. No big corporate nonsense. No flashy branding. Just clean, honest work. But I never dared because, deep down, I never believed I was capable of being the main character in my own life. Now, I was done being a sidekick. I spent the next 2 months building it out. Nights, weekends, lunch breaks, any free time I had. I watched tutorials, designed a basic website, set up an LLC, and filed all the right paperwork. I built a pricing structure, researched competitors, and created templates for onboarding clients. Slowly, I began networking in local forums, joining business Facebook groups, offering free advice on Reddit to establish credibility. I picked up my first client in late January, a self-employed graphic designer who needed help untangling a tax mess. I charged less than I should have, but it was a start. Then came another, a yoga studio owner with 3 years of back taxes. Then a tattoo artist. Then a food truck owner. They weren't huge jobs, but they were mine. And with every email, every invoice, every client thank you, something in me healed. Every moment I spent working on this business reminded me that I could take up space. I could say no. I could build something without permission. I didn't need to ask my family to see me. I could see myself. I kept it all under wraps. No family mentions. No announcements. I stopped responding to the group chat entirely. After the cabin incident, I had expected a storm, angry messages, calls, threats. But instead, they went quiet. Not out of respect, but dismissal. It was like they had silently agreed to freeze me out, as if I was being punished for not falling in line. That's when I realized I was finally free. But the final push, the moment that truly solidified the rise, came in mid-March, when I got a call from someone I never expected, my grandfather's old lawyer. "Ben," he said, "I'm reaching out because I found something in your grandfather's files. I was reviewing some estate documents, and I realized there's a letter addressed to you. It looks like it was never delivered." He said he could mail it, or I could pick it up in person. I drove there the next day. The law office was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. Mr. Alcott, the lawyer, handed me the envelope, old, yellowed, but sealed. On the front, in my grandfather's handwriting, "To Ben, for when you're ready." I opened it right there in the office. It wasn't long, just a page and a half, but every word hit me like a brick. He wrote about how he'd always seen how I was treated, how he noticed the way I got talked over at family dinners, how my siblings took without thanks, how I always gave in to keep the peace. He wrote that he admired my kindness, but he hoped I'd learn that kindness doesn't mean erasing yourself. And then he wrote this: "The world will always take from you, Ben, if you never learn to hold the line. But you don't need to become loud to be strong. You just need to be willing to walk away when they stop listening." I cried in my car for a long time after that. It felt like someone had seen me all along. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the weak one. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to be weaker so they could feel strong. That was the day I made the final decision. I wasn't going to just rebuild my life. I was going to protect it. I opened a separate business account, finalized contracts with 5 new clients, and reached out to a property lawyer about the cabin. If they wanted to play legal games, I was done being passive. I had a legal right to that property, and I was going to assert it. I even started looking into therapy, something I'd always dismissed before as unnecessary. But now I realized I had work to do. Internal work. Unpacking years of feeling small. Learning how to speak, even when my voice shook. And bit by bit, I started to feel real. Solid. Not just a placeholder in someone else's story. And as I quietly rose, something strange began to happen. My siblings started to notice. It started with Mark. He left me a voicemail, awkward, half apologetic. Something about needing help with an LLC filing for a friend. I didn't respond. Then Kara sent an email. Short and cold. "Dad said you've been making waves. Hope you're not trying to split up the cabin over some petty drama." I replied with one sentence. "I'm asserting my legal rights, same as you would if it were reversed." She didn't reply. But my dad? He hadn't reached out at all. Which, honestly, said everything I needed to know. What they didn't know, what none of them yet understood, was that I had something else planned. Something not petty, not emotional, but strategic. Thought out. Calculated. Because while they were busy calling me selfish, I was building leverage. And soon, I was going to use it. When I was younger, I used to believe that revenge was loud. Yelling matches, storming out, breaking plates, that sort of thing. But as I sat at my desk that April morning, sipping black coffee and reviewing the final drafts of my property dispute claim, I realized something far more satisfying. Real revenge is quiet, strategic, measured. It doesn't need fireworks. Just leverage. And I had plenty. It started with the cabin. After confirming with the real estate attorney that my grandfathers will clearly outline joint inheritance, even if the deed hadn't been updated, I officially filed a petition to partition the property. In layman's terms, that meant forcing the cabin to be either legally divided or sold, with the proceeds split among the rightful heirs. The best part? I didn't tell them. I knew my dad would find out soon enough. The moment he got served, probably. And when he did, he'd realize he couldn't use the cabin as collateral anymore. Not unless I agreed to it. Which I wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. But that was just the beginning. Over the past few months, while building my business and slowly untangling the knots of codependency, I'd also been digging through years of financial records. My family, for all their self-righteous posturing, had left a messy paper trail. For example, remember how Kara's kids got into those elite private schools? Turns out, part of the tuition was paid through an education fund my grandfather had set up for all his grandchildren. It was supposed to be split 3 ways. But based on the withdrawals I'd traced from the fund statements, nearly 90% of it had been used for her kids alone. I printed out the records, highlighted the numbers, made copies. I also pulled documentation from the time I'd lent Mark $2,000, money he never paid back, and dug up emails showing I'd helped him clean up his credit, co-sign on a short-term apartment lease, and even transfer a car title into his name after some shady situation involving parking tickets. I had emails, texts, even a Venmo note labeled loan, please pay back. Again, I printed everything. Not to confront them with yet, but to prepare. I wanted my own little arsenal of truth. Facts they couldn't spin. Evidence they couldn't dance around. I was tired of their games. But the real turning point came when I decided to take a closer look at my dad's business. The very one he'd begged me to co-sign a loan for. Thanks to public records and some clever use of LinkedIn and business directories, I found out that not only had his company been hemorrhaging money for years, but they'd also been taking out short-term high-interest loans just to keep payroll afloat. Worse, one of the business's side ventures, a logistics software platform he had sunk tens of thousands into, was partially funded by family investment. Only, no one had ever asked me to invest. So where did the money come from? That's when I found it. A quiet little transaction from 3 years ago, labeled as a family emergency, withdrawal from a mutual fund that had my name attached to it. One my grandfather had set up in my name when I was a teenager. I'd never touched it. I didn't even remember it existed. But there it was, emptied in a single transfer. Gone. I stared at the screen for a long time. They'd taken my money. Without telling me. Without asking. Without even pretending to include me. I remember standing up, pacing my apartment, trying to breathe through the rush of heat flooding my chest. For all the things they'd called me, for all the times they'd laughed behind my back, dismissed me, treated me like a doormat, they hadn't even seen me as human enough to deserve a heads up before stealing from me. That was when my plan solidified. It wasn't going to be about getting even. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or dramatic family showdowns. I didn't want to yell. I wanted to be done. But I wasn't walking away empty-handed. So I did what I do best. I made a list. Step 1. Partition the cabin. Already in motion. Once the court approved it, the family would either have to buy out my share or sell the property altogether. Either way, I'd finally get what was mine, and they'd have no leverage left. Step 2. File a complaint regarding the mismanagement of the education fund. I wasn't planning to sue anyone, but a formal complaint through the proper channels, the bank that managed the fund, would trigger an audit. And once that audit showed the imbalance, Kara would either have to repay what she'd used or risk legal scrutiny. Step 3. Confront my father, privately and with evidence, about the stolen mutual fund. I didn't want the money back. It was long gone. But I did want acknowledgement. And more importantly, I wanted to make it clear that if he ever used my name or assets again without permission, I'd go public. Quietly. Legally. And I had every piece of proof I needed to burn that bridge completely if he forced my hand. Step 4. Protect my future. This part was more personal. I updated my legal documents, will, power of attorney, everything. I removed all family members from emergency contact forms. I added a clause to my business stating that no familial financial involvement would ever be accepted without dual written consent. Then, I got a new phone number. I didn't delete my old one, but I turned off the ringer, put it on silent. Any call from family went straight to voicemail, where they were greeted with a new message. Hi, this is Ben. If you're calling regarding personal matters, please email me instead. If this is family, and you're calling about money, I'm not available. It was petty, and it was perfect. I told no one about my moves. Not even the lawyer I worked with knew the full picture. I kept it all airtight, meticulous, professional. Because the goal wasn't to destroy them, it was to detach. Fully, cleanly, and in a way they couldn't twist into Ben being dramatic or Ben overreacting. The beauty of it all was that I didn't have to do anything dramatic. The systems would do it for me. The legal filings, the audits, the emails, the quiet pressure of paperwork. And while all of that was moving behind the scenes, I kept building my business. By May, I had over 20 regular clients. I'd upgraded my office space, just a small co-working suite, but it felt like a throne. I replaced my worn-out couch, hung framed art on my walls, took a solo trip to Colorado, hiked, took photos, smiled for real in a selfie for the first time in years. I was living, not waiting to be useful, not hoping to be liked, just living. And then, just as I was beginning to feel settled, the text started up again. This time, it was Kara, then Mark, then my mom. Vague at first, then increasingly frantic. Kara, you need to call Dad. It's urgent. Mark, dude, what are you doing? You're tearing the family apart. Mom, Ben, please. This has gone too far. Don't do this. I didn't respond, because they still didn't get it. I wasn't doing anything to them. I was simply refusing to be the cushion that made their bad decisions feel soft. But I'll admit, part of me wondered what exactly had triggered the panic. I didn't have to wonder for long. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Legal documents. My father's business, his entire company, had gone into receivership. The bank, denied the final loan, had begun the process of liquidating assets. And one of the assets attempted to be pledged as collateral, the cabin, had been frozen in a legal dispute. My dispute. That meant the bank couldn't use it to cover losses, which meant they were coming after my dad's personal assets now. And suddenly, the man who had looked me in the eye and said, "You're being selfish," was now facing the financial consequences of a lifetime of entitlement. And I wasn't done yet. Because the final piece of my plan, well, it was almost time to put that into motion. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Thick, cream-colored envelope. No return address. Handwritten in calligraphy ink. Just my name, Ben Jameson. It was from my father. I set it on the counter and walked away. Made coffee. Fed the neighbor's cat, who'd decided my porch was his second home. Then, with the mug warm in my hand, I opened it. For pages. Neatly written. No greeting. No dear son. Just his voice, formal and strange, as if he were addressing a business associate, not the child he once tucked into bed. The first half was a defense. Of course it was. A long-winded justification about how he was under pressure, how he thought I'd understand, how he'd always provided for the family, and that this business, his legacy, was supposed to be for us. How disappointed he was that I'd chosen paperwork over people. That phrase stuck with me. The second half turned ugly. He accused me of betrayal, said I'd embarrassed him, said I'd crippled the family by forcing legal action over the cabin, that I'd turned my back on blood for pride, that I would regret this one day. And at the bottom of the last page, a postscript. You were never built for this kind of life, Ben. You're not ruthless enough. But I guess you learned a few tricks after all. I folded the letter in half and slid it into a drawer. That night, I hosted dinner in my new apartment. Nothing fancy, just a few friends I'd made through the small business community. People who laughed without condescension. People who listened. As they ate lasagna and told stories about nightmare clients and weird tax loopholes, I felt something I hadn't in years. Contentment. But let me back up one more time. Because the final stage of all this, the real revenge, wasn't just about property or bank accounts or even legal filings. It was about ownership. Of my story, my voice, my past. A few days after receiving that letter, I published a blog post. Just a personal piece on my business website, titled, Why I Said No. I didn't name names. I didn't rant. I just told the truth. About growing up quiet. About being useful but invisible. About the pressure of being the family fixer. And about how sometimes saying no is the kindest thing you can do for yourself. The post blew up. Not viral, but close. It got shared in accounting forums, small business networks, even a few family therapy groups. Clients emailed me to say they related. One woman cried during a Zoom call and said she finally had the courage to tell her brother she wouldn't co-sign his mortgage. And then the emails started coming from my own extended family. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Diane from Oregon, even my mom's estranged brother, Uncle James. They all said the same thing. We knew how they treated you. We just didn't know what to say. Uncle James added, your grandfather would have been proud. Meanwhile, the legal gears kept turning. The bank officially foreclosed on my father's business in early June. The warehouse, trucks, and inventory were auctioned. The software platform was sold for pennies. My mother moved out of their 4-bedroom home into a 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town. I heard this not from them, but from a mutual family friend who still occasionally checked in. The cabin? The court approved the petition. When my siblings learned they'd have to either buy out my 1/3 share or agree to sell, they panicked. Kara begged me for a private agreement, offered to make things right if I withdrew the court case. I told her calmly, we're past that point. Mark, of course, sent a flurry of texts trying to guilt me, accusing me of breaking up the last thing we had from Grandpa. I didn't reply. The cabin was listed that fall. It sold to a retired couple who planned to fix it up and rent it seasonally. I made sure they knew the history, handed them a small envelope of old Polaroids I'd rescued from the dusty drawers before the sale. He built this place himself, I told them. Every nail. The wife teared up. Her husband shook my hand and promised to take good care of it. My share of the sale came to just over $180,000. I used part of it to open a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name for young accountants from underserved communities. The rest went into expanding my practice. I hired an assistant, rented a bigger office, and created a mentorship program for freelancers who wanted to understand finances without being intimidated. As for my father, he reached out again, one last time, about 6 months after the business folded. Another letter. This one's shorter. Still no apology. Just, you made your point. I hope you're happy. Just remember who fed you, who clothed you, who gave you everything. Family doesn't owe each other. They support each other. I read it once, then fed it to the shredder. Because here's the thing, I was happy, not in the gloating, victorious, I got mine kind of way, but in the quiet, steady kind of way that comes from walking away from chaos and realizing the silence is beautiful, peaceful. I never wanted to destroy my family. I just wanted to be seen, heard, respected. But when that didn't happen, I did what they never expected me to do. I stood up, I stepped out, and I made a life of my own. I don't think they'll ever really understand what they lost. The value of a quiet son who would have done anything for them, if they'd only treated him like he mattered. But that's okay, because I no longer need their understanding, and I no longer need their permission. I am no longer the doormat, and I don't answer the door anymore.